Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the CleanTech Lithium investor presentation. Throughout this recorded presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged, can be submitted at any time. Just submit those using the Q&A tab on the right-hand corner of your screen. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company can review all questions submitted today and will publish those where it's appropriate to do so. Before we begin, we'd like to submit the following poll, and I'm sure the company will be most grateful for your participation. I'd now like to hand over to Daniel Fox-Davies. Good afternoon, good evening.
Mark, thank you as always. Steve, good evening to you. How are you?
Hi, Dan.
So it's been a while. Obviously, we had a little bit of a hiatus because obviously you were on the road in Europe, and then I'm afraid I was caught up. But delighted to see you back again for what is going to be the next in our ongoing series of little sort of 101 pockets. The plan for this evening was to do an overview of PFS, DFS, and really the differences between them. I've been amazed that, having been doing this for 24 years, the number of people who can get through life without really understanding the differences and what's involved. So I think everybody's very much looking forward to that. However, it would be remiss of me not to just touch on the fact that the company put out an RNS this morning announcing the commissioning of the pilot plant. And I know we've had a few questions from some shareholders about that. So if I may, I was going to say, if we can have another 5-10 minutes on that, and then we'll try and keep today's session down to about sort of just a half hour. But I know you guys put together a little video. So I was going to say, Mark, if we could just play that video, and then we'll come back to Steve and ask him to go through the RNS detail. Steve, getting very snazzy there with our graphics and our video once. Yeah. So yeah, we put out an update this morning. I've actually got it to the left here. So the pilot plant starts operations. Just I think everybody welcome just your thoughts and comments into how it's going, where we are. And I specifically, there was just a couple of questions that if anybody wants to please post a question, please do so in the chat. But yeah, obviously a little bit behind, but fantastic, it's now away.
Yes, yeah, no, we've been working on this for quite some time. As we've said, we bought this pilot plant from Sun Resin. It was built by the subsidiary in Belgium, Puritech, delivered towards the end of last year, put into construction. We started to commission. We had the Sun Resin engineers over the last week or so, completing that commissioning and getting the brine running through the plant and getting concentrated eluate out at the other end. And just to put this into context, for our shareholders, the purpose of the pilot plant is basically threefold. Now, one is to be producing lithium in a pilot plant at sufficient scale that we get good engineering data, and we can optimize the plant to get good engineering data to feed into the pre-feasibility study engineering. That's very, very important. The second one is to start producing battery-grade lithium carbonate that we can give to potential off-takers, be there battery companies, car companies, or traders, to start their product qualification program. And the qualification program is quite complex, takes quite a lot of time. Generally, the off-takers will require initially a few kilograms of the product to do their chemical analysis. Then they will require tens of kilos to start studying the morphology of the precipitate. Are they fine with that? Are there any impurities of concern to them? If all of that is fine, then they will want hundreds of kilos to do testing in their sort of demo cathode battery plants. So there's a sort of three-stage process there. So we're going to be starting to make material even before we've started to engage with off-takers, which we will be doing before too long. Now, the pilot plant, we bring down brine, and the pilot plant is based at Copiapó, where we have people living there. All the support is there, and we can use it not just for processing brine from Laguna Verde, but we'll also do it from Francisco Basin, our other exploration projects, and we could do testing on third-party brines in Chile as well. So that's why it's located in Copiapó.
Steve, sorry, just on that point. So how far, for those that don't know, so how far is Copiapó from Laguna Verde?
It's about 250 kilometers.
Okay.
So what we do is to pump brine from the extraction wells into tankers, and we truck it down to Copiapó. We have very large storage reservoirs in our facility, which we can then feed the brine through the DLE plant, produce concentrated eluate. The brine is about 200 ppm, just under 200 ppm lithium. We expect the lithium in the concentrated eluate to be in the region of 400 to 600 parts per million. We then use reverse osmosis to concentrate the eluate further to about 4,000 ppm. So that's the equipment that we have in the pilot plant. It's the DLE and reverse osmosis to get a 4,000 ppm eluate.
And so how long does that take you? I mean, how long does it take you to run through to get to the 400 and then to go from the 400 to the 600 up to the 4,000?
Well, you're virtually getting the 400 ppm instantaneously. The moment you start feeding the brine, within hours, you're getting the 400 ppm eluate. The pilot plant has 30 columns, and you're feeding 6 of them in parallel. There's a couple of stages of absorption, and then the adsorbed lithium on the adsorbent is then washed off with water. There's 3 parallel columns of 3 stages. When that is emitted from that is the concentrated eluate. The whole cycle of processing of the 30 columns is about a 40-hour cycle. But you're producing eluate within a couple of hours of feeding the brine into the plant. The next stage to pass the eluate, when we're satisfied the concentration is good, we've got all the processing conditions optimized, we will then pass through a reverse osmosis, and again you're looking at almost instantaneous, within minutes of passing the eluate through. You get a 10 times concentration. You get pretty clean water out one side and concentrated eluate at 4,000 ppm at the other side. So this first stage is all to look at making what we consider a good quality eluate, that we've eliminated the impurities. And during the DLE, 99.5% of the impurities are left behind in the spent brine. We get 95% extraction of lithium into the concentrated eluate. This is the bit that we do in Copiapó. Then the next stage is the downstream conversion to lithium carbonate. And rather than spending $4 million on building our own plant in Copiapó, there are existing facilities in North America. And we've had discussions with 3 companies in North America. And we've signed a contract with one called Conductive Energy. They're based out of Calgary. They have their processing plant in Chicago, and they've been doing this work, both DLE and conversion to carbonate, for a number of projects in North America in the last year or two. And the other company we're working with is Forward Water Technologies of Toronto. And it's their equipment that's forming the first part of the downstream processing. From the 4,000 ppm eluate, we send to Chicago. Forward Technologies are sending their reverse osmosis and forward osmosis plant in containers to the Conductive pilot plant facility. And that stage of forward and reverse osmosis and forward osmosis will increase the concentration to about 20,000 ppm lithium in the eluate. Then the Conductive energy process plant takes it further. They do the further removal of traces of calcium, magnesium, boron from ion exchange. Then it's the carbonation to precipitate lithium carbonate and bicarbonation to form the battery grade lithium carbonate, which then gets filtered and dried and bagged. So that's the process. It's 2-part. DLE is in Chile, and the downstream conversion is being done in Chicago. And the product will be analyzed both by conductive and independent laboratories to confirm that it is battery grade material.
So picking up on that last point there, Steve. So just for the shareholders general, I mean, back of the envelope, we're now running cycles. You're producing eluate. How many cycles do you need to do to get sufficient eluate at 4,000 ppm to then ship? And how much would you ship in one go? How long does it take to get from Chile up to Chicago? And how long does it take then for the company in Chicago to go through that process to take it up to 20,000?
Our estimate is that to get the first batch of concentrated eluate will take about a month. We're looking at shipping batches of 43 cubic meters of concentrated eluate to Chicago. Those go in tanks, in containers from the coast, whether it goes from Antofagasta or Valparaiso. The route would probably be through Seattle and then by truck to Chicago. That's probably going to take a couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks to get to Chicago. Then the plant in Chicago will already have been set up. We've sent smaller quantities directly to Chicago for Conductive Energy to set up their plant specifically for our eluate, so that when the larger quantity arrives, they start the processing immediately. And again, they need to do the final tweaking, make sure every part is working, but it should be weeks to produce the lithium carbonate, then another week to get it analyzed. From a batch of 43 cubic meters that we send out, we'll be producing just over 800 kilograms, of lithium carbonate per batch. And as I say, that will be sufficient to start off discussions with potential off-takers, because they only need kilos and tens of kilos initially. But once we start with multiple off-takers who will want hundreds of kilos, we'll be sending more batches for processing.
And Steve, on that note, I mean, I know in the past, dealing with other companies, when they sent things off to labs, there's problems. But so how long does it take to go to the 2 labs so we can actually get that first report back, independent report saying your actual end product is battery grade?
From taking the sample, sending it to a laboratory, within 2 weeks, we'll have the analyses. That's a normal time.
Okay,
and that's a full spread. That's not just ensuring that it's more than 99.5% lithium carbonate, but it's the full spectrum of all the impurities, which are of concern to battery producers. Which
on our last run, we were very happy that it looks like we have very low levels of impurities of all the nasties that some of them.
Yeah, when we first started working with DLE, we produced a 1 kilogram sample, and that was more than 99.5%. It's more like 99.9% lithium carbonate with very low impurities.
So back of the envelope, with a bit of slippage in, what we'd hope to be able to sort of get that thing about 2 months from today?
We're the middle of March. Yeah, about that. No, provided everything goes smoothly, we should be, during the course of May, having good data of what's going on at conductive energy. Now, clearly, over the next month, we'll have data coming out of the pilot plant in Copiapó, so we'll be able to give information how that is going, what the efficiency is, what the recovery is. Are we getting the 400 to 600 ppm? Are we getting the upgrading to 4,000 ppm? And what are the impurity levels of the eluate that we're going to send to Chicago?
And then the fun begins. I mean, I know in conversations that you have a number of parties who've approached in the data room, so all of them waiting to actually get that final end product and the first couple of kilos, and then we can start really going out to market.
And I say that there's 3 main reasons for this pilot plant. Is 1, to get process design information, 2, to get product out, and 3 is for people to see it. We want people in the community, the indigenous communities, the government, the universities, the students, the people in Copiapó, to be able to visit the plant and actually see DLE in operation. Brine going in one end, eluate going at the other end, spent brine going back into the tankers to be taken back to site.
Excellent. Well, we very much look forward to having the update in terms of how the process is going, and then obviously we look forward to 2 or so months from now when we can actually say, here is our end product, and then looking forward to seeing how those negotiations lead to potential offtake partners and end users. Thank you very much for that, Steve. I think that's very useful. If anybody has any further questions, do please drop them into the Q&A, and I will look to address them at the end. So the main one for today, though, Steve, was we've been talking about some of the key aspects that the company is going to have to do to go through its journey from exploration through to being a producer. We touched the other day on the drilling campaign. We've touched on DLE technology. And obviously, we put out an announcement about the expected date for the PFS. And I've had a number of people in the course of conversation with the shareholders asking to really understand what's the difference between the scoping study, the PFS, and then how the PFS sits into the DFS and the time is between that. And given that you've done this on a number of occasions before, I thought it'd be quite useful if we could just run through those in a generic sense, and then we can come back to applying that to how that is to CleanTech Lithium at the moment and where we are on that schedule, the various parts that are coming into the PFS, and then how the PFS will move in. Because a couple of people in the Telegram group were commenting earlier about the delay of certain of our peer group, like Lake Resources, how they took several years to go from the PFS to the DFS. And I know in our conversation that we've been discussing that not all PFSs are necessarily equal. And one of the things why we've decided to delay slightly is to get a much more robust and comprehensive PFS, which will then allow us to feed more easily into the DFS. But maybe you want to start with the generic definitions of scoping studies, Ford.
Yeah, let's see if we can get these slides. First of all, let's talk a little bit about the situation in Chile, because it's been very interesting in the last month. Everybody's been concerned with the lithium price coming down, concerned about the government awarding CLs and the delays in that. The minister for mining was in Toronto speaking at PDAC a couple of weeks ago. And again, she was very strong in saying, look, the government's moving ahead fast. They will expect by the end of March to have finished their study and defining which salars will be protected from exploitation. As you know, in the National Lithium Strategy, they say 30% will be protected, 70% will be allowed to go into exploitation. And that definition will be at the end of this month, and that will then be announced. They have just about finished all the dialogue with community groups, and she expects at the end of this month to be able to announce what is the form of the contracts that will be put in place for the sales, and to have a better definition of those contracts by the middle of the year. Now, in the middle of this, the Minister of Finance was public in Chile and saying the government wants to see 3 or 4 new lithium projects in production by 2026, not including any expansions or projects by SQM or Albemarle. So that's 3 to 4 new projects. And basically, if you look at what's happening in Chile, nobody apart from CleanTech Lithium has done any exploration in detail, for lithium, or have conducted any studies or have declared any resources. So if there are going to be 3 or 4 projects in production by 2026, we are way in advance of any other project in Chile. The other thing that you've seen in the recent weeks, clearly the lithium price collapse over the last year. There's lots of signs it's reached the bottom, and it started to increase from the bottom of 12,000. It hit 15,000 yesterday, and all the analysts are expecting prices to continue to strengthen in the second half of the year. So this is all looking very positive for us. Now, if we start to look at feasibility studies, basically it's in 3 stages. The preliminary economic assessment or scoping study, then it's the pre-feasibility study and the feasibility study. Lots of people talk about bankable feasibility studies. I just prefer feasibility study. And you're looking at different things in each of these. With the scoping study, it's a low-level study. You're looking for any red flags which will prevent the project from proceeding. You're looking at early stage concepts. What resources do you have there? Basically, this is after exploration, after you've declared a resource. What type of metallurgy will be used? What are the economics looking like, based on very limited engineering and largely desktop studies, and looking at data and cost data from a database. And basically, we've done these conceptual studies for both Laguna Verde and Francisco Basin. We produced results which look to have no red flags and very robust economic results. Now, once you've said that, you're then saying, do the results look good enough that we can progress into a pre-feasibility study? And we've said, yes, the results look good. Let's go on to a pre-feasibility study. And that study is again looking at the input, which is the resources which you have, but you can only use those resources which you have a higher degree of confidence. Those are the measured and indicated resources as part of your study. And what we're looking at is all the alternatives, all the options that we have for the project. It could be, what are the alternatives in terms of the mining or the pumping or the location of the wells? What is the production rate? What is the processing technology that's going to be used? Is it going to be an adsorbent-based DLE? Is it going to, obviously we can't use evaporation, no ponds. That's no longer considered sustainable in Chile, but there are other processing methods. What is the best processing methods to go downstream to get lithium carbonate? Do we want to produce lithium carbonate? No, the market is in a period of change. Most of the battery manufacturers in North America and the EU want lithium hydroxide for their high-powered NMC batteries, for the Porsches and Mercedes. In China, they want carbonate for the lower power but very much cheaper vehicles. Now, we clearly have an advantage in selling into the EU and the United States that want green lithium, because clearly we've said we're going to be powered off renewable energy, and we're going to be re-injecting the brine back underground so we don't deplete the aquifer. We should have preferential status for delivery of material into the EU. But at the moment, they only want hydroxide. But that market is changing as well. There's been pushback from consumers saying that the EV cars in the United States and Europe are too expensive. They want cheaper vehicles. Now you're seeing the Chinese selling BYDs and other vehicles into Europe. The European motor manufacturers have picked up on that. Renault are now looking at much cheaper vehicles, and the cheaper vehicles need the LFP batteries, which require the lithium carbonate. So there's a growth in demand of lithium carbonate. And then coming down the road, not just yet, but within a couple of years, are solid-state batteries. We've had, I think I've mentioned before, Toyota are now commercializing their solid-state batteries, and they're professing to have a range of 1,500 kilometers off the battery with a 10 to 15-minute recharge time. So a game changer as far as EV vehicles, and they're inherently safer. And they need more lithium than the lithium-ion battery because the anode is not graphite, but it's lithium.
So just coming back to the PFS, so it's a bit more focused. So those are some of the variables that would come in. But what are the things that CleanTech Lithium has to achieve in its milestones to get the PFS out?
Well, we have to study all of these aspects. I'll go into more detail on our particular PFS in the next slide. But basically, what we're looking at pre-feasibility study is looking at all the options, and at the end of the day, looking at what we consider is the best option to take forward into a full feasibility study. So we are doing lots of trade-off studies and then finding out what is the best project to take forward. And that we go into the feasibility study. And we're saying that this is the best project. Then we go into much more engineering. We'll do somewhere just under 50% engineering. We'll get much better information on the CapEx and the OpEx because we're going out for quotes on the pieces of equipment. We have all of our material takeoffs and quantities and get quotes from engineering and construction companies. So we're building up a much more robust CapEx and OpEx estimate in the 10 to 15% range. And what we want at the feasibility study is have sufficient detail in the project, in the mining or the extraction of the brine, the processing of the brine, the plant location, infrastructure, the sources of power and water, and all of those costs to a level where the company can say, yes, this project looks attractive, we want to take it forward, and financing institutions can see that the project is one that they want to provide finance for. Hence, often it's called a bankable feasibility study because it meets the bank's requirements. So basically,
sorry,
these
on that,
are three stages.
people interchange bankable feasibility study with feasibility study, and it's also the same interchangeable for definitive feasibility study.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So all three terms, same thing. And the PEA is also often referred to or interchanged with scoping study.
Correct, yeah. So
Just
scoping study, PEA, conceptual in nature, low level in information. Does it look interesting to take to PFS? PFS, look at all the options and look at what you consider the best project to take forward into feasibility study, and that you take into much more detail into terms of engineering, costing, and refining any issues that have arisen from the PFS. So those are basically the three stages of study.
So I think the one thing I would sort of come back to there slightly, just on the PFS, is that there is no definitive set guideline, because obviously we had hoped to be out earlier this year. There was a certain expectation, there was a certain disappointment. But I think the key thing that I think it might be good to come across is that while there is a range of areas that need to be discussed, the level of detail that you can go into can be a certain depth, or it can be much more. But the more you do into the PFS, the more that should facilitate the advancement of the DFS, or the feasibility study, at a swifter rate. So the point I think I want to come back to, an open conversation with you, is that the board has decided that it's important to have a much more comprehensive and thorough PFS. And when we look at the PFSs on some of the peer groups, not all of them are as robust as we're hoping to be. Would that be fair?
And in particular, what you don't want to do is start to go into other trade-offs and look at options, in your feasibility study. You do that at the pre-feasibility study and come up with what is the best project, and then you work hard at delivering that feasibility study as rapidly as possible.
Okay, great. Let's move on to the next one.
The next issue, a number of laymen don't sort of recognize the difference between resources and reserves. Isn't it all the same thing? And no, it's not. No, basically, mineral resources, when you do the exploration, you're looking at what is the valuable mineral, in our case lithium, which is underground. And that'll be a ballpark. The whole aquifer, as we've declared, contains at the moment 1.8 million tons of lithium carbonate equivalent. Now, you need reserves to be able to have a production plan which you have high confidence in, and that will form your production forecast and financial forecast in the future. And in going from resources to reserves, you need to undertake a pre-feasibility study or a feasibility study and look at all what we call modifying factors. You're looking at, can those resources be mined? Can they be processed? What are the economics of those? Is there a cutoff grade below which is uneconomic to process those resources? Is there a market for the material? Are there any legal impediments, any environmental issues that are preventing part of that resource from being processed? Maybe part of the resource is sitting in a national park. You can't get at it, but it's still a resource, but it will never become a reserve. Are there government issues? Yeah, we have a resource, but we don't have a reserve until we have a sale, and that's or pretty much a guarantee of a sale. You need an operating contract to be able to extract. So what you're doing is looking at, from the resource, what is going to be the economically mineable part of that resource, which will be declared as reserves. And only the two parts, the indicated and the measured, where you have higher confidence, will go into what we call probable and proved reserves. And when I say confidence, it's common practice in Chile when you're looking at brine. If you're doing a drill hole, you're looking at an area of a 1.5 kilometer radius around that drill hole, and you're satisfied you have sufficient continuity that will be measured. The area which is from 1.5 to 3 kilometers, from that drill hole, will be indicated. And anything more than 3 kilometers will have to be considered inferred, as long as there is geological, in our case, geophysical data to indicate that there's the likelihood of lithium-bearing material underground. So you've got those three confidence levels, and that translates into proved and probable reserves, which go into the production plan in the pre-feasibility and the feasibility study. And
Steve,
this is
I don't want to segue too much off, but just on that note, and the current drilling, how much of the current drilling is expansion of the resource, and how much of the current drilling is to help move that resource into higher confidence levels of indicated and measured, just for our shareholders?
In Laguna Verde, we have 1.8 million tons of declared resource, of which 1.1 million is measured and indicated. With the geophysics, we expected to find some additional material deeper, but I think probably there may be some increase in the overall measured and indicated resource, but we'll probably get more movement from the indicated into the measured, and maybe some inferred into indicated. So I think we're looking more for quality of resource rather than increasing quantity of resource in this drilling campaign. But the major part of the campaign is not so much in the resource, but it's getting an understanding of the hydrogeology. As I say, we've engaged Montgomery and associates. They need to get good information on the porosity and the permeability of the aquifer. That's why we're doing pumping tests to see at what rate we can extract the brine from the aquifer, and what the drawdown rate, the cone of depression, as it's called, is. Also doing re-injection, because we need not only to be able to extract, but then to demonstrate that we can re-inject. What happens when we re-inject to the groundwater levels in those areas that we are injecting. All this goes into build a hydrogeological model, which we then use to plan the extraction well field and the re-injection well field as part of the pre-feasibility study. So a lot of this drilling work is not just to increase resources, it's to improve quality of the resource, but to get a lot more hydrogeological information, which is essential for the production planning.
No, I think it's quite important for many of you to remember this is sort of more like an oil field extraction than sort of traditional mine. Although we put ourselves as a mining company, it's much more to do with the wells and the re-injection and the drawdown and depletions, etc. Excellent. Well, thank you for that. Okay, so
then if we look at a PFS, this is the sort of chapters that go into a PFS, and this is our PFS for Laguna Verde, and there's many chapters up front. Basically, description of the project, the climate, where it is, history of exploration, the geology, deposit type, etc., etc. Then the bits I put in yellow is where we have inputs, real inputs into the PFS, and the reds are where we have major outputs from the PFS. So clearly, Chapter 10 is drilling. We'll have full description of what we've done, how we've done it, how many holes, where, what the results were, all the analyses. So that's all in absolute detail. And then all of that data goes through verification, audit, how we did the laboratory analysis, the checks on the laboratories, that's all good. We actually brought in an expert, a chap called Don Haynes, to do the full QA/QC audit of all our processes, from drilling, sampling, delivery to laboratory, getting the results.
Steve, sorry, just for those who may not be aware, QA/QC?
Quality assurance, quality control, to make sure we have absolute confidence in the results that we have produced. And we chose Don Haynes because he wrote the standards in lithium brine analysis and resource estimation for the Canadian Institute of Metallurgy, which was used by the ASX for their guidelines for reporting under JORC as well. And he gave a very good, clean bill of health to all the work that we've done in terms of the quality. Then, of course, we have the resource estimates, which we've already put out for Laguna Verde, 1.8 million. And we'll have another resource estimate at the end of this drilling season this year. We have a whole chapter 13 there, and all the mineral processing and metallurgical testing we've been doing ourselves in the laboratory, testing all the various resins and adsorbents from many manufacturers. We have results from the tests which those manufacturers have been doing at their facilities in China and Argentina and North America. And we will be having the results from the pilot plant testing will be going into here. So this is all data that goes to feed into the engineering. Now, having defined the resource, having a very good understanding of the hydrogeology and what is going to be used for the mining, the extraction wells and the reinjection wells and the processing, then Montgomery & Associates will use all of that information to put out the first mineral reserve estimate. So from the 1.8 million, not everything can be extracted, because a lot of the water just can't be pumped from that aquifer. And we'll get an estimate of how much of that can be recovered. And to give an indication, ballpark, in Latin American brines, it's considered about a third of the resource can be recovered and as economically extractable lithium brine. Some brines that higher porosity, it may be higher than that. Others may be a bit lower than that. But that's a rule of thumb. So the reserve will always be significantly less than the resource. Then the mining method.
But Steve, on that note of rotation, if we're doing 20,000 ton a year, 40,000 ton a year, we're looking at a 10 to 15. You're looking really to have a reserve number at 400 to 600,000 tons.
Yeah, and clearly, depending on that reserve number, we did the scoping study at 20,000. That's we thought that would be a good number. But when we're doing the PFS, this full analysis of the reserves and the mining in terms of the capacity of each well, where they will be located, where the reinjection will be done to maximize the recovery of the resource, we'll get a much better idea of whether the optimum capacity for the project, is it 20,000? Is it 17,000? Is it 22,000? And that's will be one of the outputs of the pre-feasibility study. What is the optimum production rate from this project? Now, clearly, we want maximum production rate to maximize cash flow, but it needs to be sustainable over a reasonably long period of time. So that comes out of here. Recovery methods. We've focused on using adsorbent resin. We're using alumina-based adsorbent. It could have been titanium based. It could have been solvent extraction, but we're using an alumina resin in our pilot plant. But then we need to put all the downstream processing stages as well, all the way through to our end product. Project infrastructure, that's a big issue. Where is the plant going to be? Is the entire plant all the way through to carbonate going to be at the project site, which is up at 4,300 meters, where we can get quite heavy snow, and it can get very cold during the winter months? Or do we only want to have the DLE and eluate concentration up at the project site, and then transport the concentrated eluate down to a carbonation plant down on the coast? That means we have we don't have to transport all the carbonate and other sort of chemicals and things up to the project site. And there may be benefits in doing that, because we have two projects, Laguna Verde and Francisco Basin. Do we want to have a total duplicate plant, all the way to carbonate at both facilities? Or do we want to have the DLE and eluate concentration at both sites and ship the eluate to a common downstream facility? So these are all the issues we look at in the pre-feasibility study. Power, water, what is the where is the grid in Chile? We have an interconnected grid. We have a power line going to the north of us to mining, other mining projects. Does the line have the capacity for the 25 megawatts that we need? Where do we connect in? We would need to have a substation there, then a transmission line to the project. Is there overground? Is it underground? What is the routing to get to the project site? In discussion with the power companies, do we build the power line and pay for the capex, and they just feed power into it, or will they contract to build the transmission line and we pay for the power delivered at the project site? Mm-hmm. Water, where does the water come from? Do we put down water wells in the facility? But we're putting down extraction wells, and we're going through zones of pretty much fresh water. Can we use the water before we get to the brine and treat that by reverse osmosis and get water for the project? So these are all the issues that we look at there. Market studies. Again, what is the market for the product? Hydroxide, carbonate, chloride. What are the trends in the future? All helps to drive us to define what is the best product that we want to make. And if it turns out to be carbonate is the best product for us, are we flexible enough in our project to, in the future, if the market changes and wants chloride for the solid state batteries, will we be able to modify our plant to produce chloride in the future? What are all the environmental issues? Now, at Laguna Verde, we have a lake, a very pretty green lake on the surface. We need to be able to demonstrate with the hydrological modeling, and we're pumping from sort of 100, 150 meters below that lake, that we can extract and re-inject without affecting the surface lake in any respect whatsoever. Are there any endangered species in the area? Obviously, we've been doing baseline studies. We'll have a full environmental impact, but again, we need to highlight: are there any issues which could impact the permitting of this project? What are the communities living around the area? Obviously, there's nobody living within 100 kilometers of the project site, but we are passing through communities on the transport corridors. Are there any issues? The social.
Okay, so I think I'm just cognizant we've only got about 10 minutes onto the hour. Okay, so I get a sense of all the detail then, Steve. Let's move on to the next one. I suppose one question that comes out of this is, we're looking at doing the PFS for Laguna Verde at the moment. I imagine a large chunk of this, and particularly the market study things, can get recycled into the PFS for Francisco Basin.
Yes, yeah. Obviously, the drilling and resource is specific, but the mining, the extraction, re-injection design of the wells and the processing should be pretty much the same.
So both the cost and the timing for the second PFS should be significantly less.
It should be, because a lot of the work will be done during this one.
Okay.
And again, this is the pilot plant, and the data from the pilot plant is essential for the engineering. But particularly, what are the impurity levels that come through the resin? They're all very small, but they have to be taken out, and that affects the design of the downstream polishing and ion exchange and other stuff. So the pilot plant is essential input into the PFS. And then what do we do with this PFS? And people say, why haven't we gone out and got offtake contracts and financing and investors? And the reality is all of this starts with a pre-feasibility study. Now, my experience is that financing institutions, potential strategic investors in a project, they are not really spending the time or wanting to take projects to their board until there's at least a comprehensive pre-feasibility study that demonstrates, yes, this is a good project, it's got good economic returns, and it can produce the material which the off-takers will want. And after the pre-feasibility study is done, we then do all of our work in parallel. Now, we define the project, we're into DFS. Whilst we're doing the DFS, we are doing the environmental impact assessment, and we've done the baseline studies. We will then use the pre-feasibility project configuration and engineering in the EIA to determine what impacts, and if there are, what mitigating measures are going to be put in place. And then from the EIA, that gets submitted into the permitting authorities. With a PFS, we then start talking to off-takers. We now have material which we can give them. We can say we can produce 20,000 tons a year, and we want to start talking off-take with you. But if you want our off-take, our nice green lithium off-take, how are you going to cornerstone the financing for this project? And this is where strategic investors, and we have 5 already signed up under NDA, and there will be more who will want the material, and largely they will want to have a strategic investment in the not in CleanTech Lithium, but at the project level. They're being pushed. If you listen to the Benchmark Minerals and the MD Simon Moores, he's still very strong every week and saying, look, you car companies, battery companies, if you want security of supply, you've got to take a position in the actual production process. So get an equity or a debt investment in these projects. So offtake, strategic investors, and financing. We've already talked to certain financing institutions like KfW, but there are many other multilaterals and commercial banks and streaming companies who, again, on the back of a PFS, will start to look at whether they want to be a participant in the project. And usually I aim to line up the offtake contracts, the terms of the strategic investment, and the financing package all in agreements, and they will be in a form that when we have certain things in place and we can start drawing down the finance, all those agreements get signed in a format that we can start drawing on finance. And that means there must be a positive DFS, the environmental permit must be in place, and there must be a CO, an operating contract in place. So we can do all of those studies. We can then get our agreements in place, And when we have the DFS, the environmental permit, and the sale, that's then we can start to draw down the financing packages that we would have put in place. And
So
all
Steve,
of this happens in parallel.
just cognizant of time, and I do want to get to the questions from shareholders. We're probably about 5 minutes over, but just on that note, and looking at your flow sheet here, how long would you expect it to go from the PFS to the DFS, given some of the comments people made about the timeline that it took Lake between their two?
My estimate, if the pre-feasibility study is very robust and thorough at looking at all the alternatives and coming out with the best, then we push with the same engineering company, Worley, into the DFS. And I've done a DFS in 6 months. I would expect middle of next year would be a reasonable time for a DFS. We're looking.
So I think the point we're trying to make here is that sometimes companies rush a PFS and they put it out, and maybe it's not as comprehensive, which then can lead to a significant gap between the two.
Correct.
In other people's cases, yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think that's very useful. I'm conscious that we do have a number of questions from shareholders in. So that outlines the difference between the two and all the components. And then the DFS is just a further concentration between the two. And we hope that will be something between 6 to 9 months between the two. I just wanted to, you got control of the slides there. What was our last slide that we had?
No, that was the end.
That was that one. Okay, well, thank you. I mean, I think that's very useful for a number of people in just understanding the detail that goes in. I would like to just, because we were remiss, we didn't get to all of them. There's a couple of here we can answer. There's some that we can't. But Steve, very briefly, we had a chat about the seals and the political one. We understand there's no guaranteed time frame, but people are just asking whether you can comment about the ongoing discussions with the government.
Yeah, we've had discussions with government, and basically said, look, no, thanks for your submission. We submitted it in September last year, but they said, look, we can't address those until we finish our exercise of defining which salars are going to be protected. And clearly, Laguna Verde will not be one of those. We have very strong community support. Who are pushing government very strongly and saying, look, you want to get ahead with new lithium projects in Chile. Here is an advanced project. Let's get ahead with this one as quickly as possible.
So we could summarize that sort of no definitive feedback, but the minister's saying they want 4 up and running by 2026, of which we have to be in at least the top 4 in terms of advanced stage.
At the moment, there are no advanced projects in Chile except the 2 of CleanTech Lithium. Nobody else has done any exploration whatsoever.
Excellent. Okay, these came in from Steve M. Steve also just asked about the lithium pricing. Obviously, the sell-off has not been great for the market, and how we're seeing the demand versus supply. Steve, if I can say, Wilson's put out a report that we mentioned on our last call, which I'm happy to put in the Telegram group. Canacor's just given an updated pricing, and so has Benchmark. But they're all calling for a recovery over the next 12 to 24 months, significantly in the lithium price, moving back into a deficit in the second half of this year. But I think it's probably better to send you those reports, Steve, than have us asking Steve here to go into depth, because obviously we're just we're taking a review on third-party consultancy. There's a question here from Ian G about what are the warrants for, when do they come into effect? Ian, could you just reply back to that, and what warrants you're talking about, warranties or the warrants in the last financing? If you could clarify, I'll come back to you in a minute. Andy B. Steve's asking, is how's the Eluate going to be transported to the US? But you touched on that. It's going on a container ship and then on trucks. Is the standard container sizes?
I think each vessel is about 25 cubic meters. So there'll be a couple of containers going to Chicago for each 43 cubic meter batch.
But they're standard. I mean, they're obviously designed to take liquid, but they're standard shipping containers. So they'll be over ship and road. Andy was commenting that the exact dates being quoted. Andy, I think everybody's learned through years of mining that it's can be to the detriment to the company to give exact dates. Things can take a little bit longer. You might leave a day for downline. Obviously, while the plant's being commissioned, it's still being sort of ramped up and go through that process. You delayed a day and you miss a shipping date. So I think it's very prudent to give approximate dates of being around 2 months rather than trying to give hard and fast dates. Steve, is you happy with that?
Yeah. I don't give hard dates.
Yeah, it's a general regression. So John A was asking about the seals, and again, you know, that's with the government just doing their internal policy, and then they can go back to everybody. So that's a generic governmental issue rather than something specifically. But again, I would reiterate when anybody asks about the seals, it was the Chilean government that invited CleanTech to put their seal applications in. It was at their suggestion. Originally, the company had anticipated on doing it at a slightly later date. But it was the government last year that said we should get on and put those applications in. So it was with their support and encouragement. Right. We have Lance B here. Well, that's going to come back on. So one more question from John. Look at the current high-end EV market, able to upgrade to solid-state batteries. John, I don't think either Steve or myself can really comment about solid-state batteries into cars. I can send you some research from other people on the battery usage in the car industry, probably a bit more in depth for you. So Steve, Lance V is asking a bit of a sidestep, but on the strategic note with respect to Francisco Basin, is it part of the current strategic goal to focus on LV with a view to commercializing that ahead of any substantive development on Francisco Basin, such that the company perhaps look to self-finance Francisco Basin with a view with that being able to supply product at the margin than saying there's an offtake agreement? I imagine that's something that will come out of the two PFSs.
Yeah, I think no Francisco, no Basin. No, we've parked work on that because the finance that we did at the end of last year, we decided to apply all of that to progress Laguna Verde as rapidly as possible. And clearly, we need to learn a lot on the design of extraction and reinjection wells, and on the processing with the DLE, with the pilot plant and the engineering going into the PFS. All of that will be directly applicable into Francisco Basin. So we should really do all of that work before we start the PFS on Francisco Basin. But clearly, when we have more funding available, we would like to go back into Francisco Basin and get back into increasing the size of that resource. If you remember, we did limited drilling in Francisco Basin. We only have we have a good resource of 0.9 million tons, but we'd like to get that one significantly increased. So when we have funding, we will get back into the drilling program of Francisco Basin.
Thank you. So Mars was asking, saying, why has the PFS always been in Q1 right up to our weekly call on the 21st of February? The drilling and the pilot plant results have not been delayed since. We can come on to that now, slight clarification there, Mars. But a 6-month delay to the PFS, what new information led to this? And he's also just commenting that we've remained silent on the DFS and the funding. Now, obviously, we've spoken about the DFS and the delay between the two. And Steve, I'll pass you in a second. But Mars, I think we've been very candid that we have been delayed in the commissioning. It happens. These are not off the shelf. Everything needs some tweaking, different looks at resins. Some parts were delayed. I think we mentioned on one that some parts were missent and then had to be returned. So the pilot plant has been delayed. We were hoping for it to be ready towards the end of the third quarter, early fourth quarter last year. It's regrettable, but it's just the nature of the mining industry. So those have been one factors. But Steve, just other comment, please, about why the PFS has been delayed. Obviously, we've mentioned before how it's going to be much more in-depth and thorough than we'd originally planned.
Yeah, I think the largest reason for it is really needing to get much more robust and more hydrogeological data. We did our drilling programs last year. We did a couple of pumping tests and recognized that we need to really understand the hydrogeology of the basin, which is why we brought in Montgomery experts in this area. We brought on board another consultant who's been working in Argentina on re-injection wells and doing this work as part of the work going into the pre-feasibility study. We cannot complete the pre-feasibility study until we have very solid hydrogeological model to plan the extraction and re-injection wells. And as I say, that work with Montgomery, we engaged them at the end of last year. We raised the money in November to continue the drilling work, and that work will go on until May. And then we'll be doing the analysis of resources, reserves, and the hydrogeological modeling update. So that's the reality. The work needed to be done on the resource, reserves, and hydrogeology. Pilot plant delays, it fits into that. There are other things we're looking at as part of the PFS, the different products. But the main rationale is making sure we've got thorough hydrogeological information, because that's important feeding into the EIA.
That one. And Miles, if I can just go on that one. So there was always a schedule of works, and the company had hoped it was going to go to the ASX towards the third quarter last year. There was the backup on the ASX. They had a shortage of staff in both deals, which then led to a choice of the company between coming back to the UK market. But the funds that were raised are doing these drilling programs. So that was a couple of months behind, which has led then to a delay of starting of the works. And then as we've gone into more detail, the decision has been to do a much more robust PFS, which is just going to take longer. So you do sometimes get this slippage in dates, and that's what sort of came about. And with respect to your comments about the DFS, as Steve said, would look to come in after the PFS. And at that point, one could then start looking at what is the actual detailed funding requirements, and at that point you're entering into conversations with both project financiers, the banks in terms of debt financing, and with offtake partners. So you really need to go for the PFS, the DFS to give you hard and fast numbers, and then you can end into meaningful conversations about how you're going to fund that, the majority of which we believe will come in debt rather than dilution to shareholders. On that one, here's Steve, want to be diplomatic about. So Neil K was asking, in previous updates, we've talked about ourselves in comparison to Lake Resources, which is also looking to a DLE project just over the border in Argentina, but obviously they don't own their entire basin. And they've had a bit of a share collapse, although they've had some changes in senior management. And we're just asking is, given that we've compared ourselves to them in terms of being at DLE and in Latin America, how can we avoid and how do we differentiate ourselves in terms of being able to represent the shareholder value or the value in the company and avoid the collapse in the share price that they've had?
What we have to do is deliver very robust studies, which highlights what is the capital cost and the operating cost. The scoping studies indicated a fairly low capital cost. Many other DLE projects are coming out with higher capital costs because of the increased infrastructure which they have. Fortunately, we have a lot of existing infrastructure in Chile. If we look at Lake Resources, their big issues were on power. I think they had to put in 350 kilometers of power line and temporary diesel power to get themselves established. So their capex is very, very much higher. I think during their studies, they've been having a few project changes, which we clearly don't want to do. We want to look at all the alternatives at the PFS, and when we finish that, go fast into PFS, into DFS, and make sure that we don't surprise the market at the end of the day. When you go into the market and say the capital cost is 700 million, and then with production in 2026, and then turn around, it's going to be 1.26 billion, and production 2 years later. Clearly, shareholders don't like that. So what we want to make sure is our PFS is thorough, and we can put that information out into the market to reassure everybody that we have confidence in what we're doing.
And I think that comes back to the point. We've always said there are a number of projects out there, but when you look at them, there's a number that we question would ever actually get into production. We looked at a number of projects at Fox Davis before deciding to get involved in trying to support CleanTech through their funding requirements and their IPO and the transition from a private onto the market. And one of the things we liked about it is when we looked at it, we genuinely believe that the company has got a very strong chance of going through to being a producing lithium developer, for want of a better word. When we look at a lot of the peer groups, there are factors to do either location, people, power, access to water, people living on the property, which we think a lot of these projects will be difficult to overcome. In the US, you've got some lithium projects on native lands there with mass native Indian burial sites on there and people protesting. But in the case of CleanTech, owning the entire basin, allowing it to do its reinjection, the fact that there are no people around, very limited fauna, a very pro-mining site in terms of Chile, the fact of being a free trade country with the US and the benefits from the Inflation Reduction Act, all of these are huge, massive positives for the company, which can tend to be overlooked. So in answer to that one, I think the key thing is we're maybe taking a little bit longer than we'd necessarily originally planned to do, but we're doing a thorough job. We're making sure that we inform the market on a regular basis, and we're making sure we don't come up with any surprises so that we can meet our targets, both in terms of costs and deadlines for getting into production. Steve, have a thanks from Ian on the indications there from Ian G. Ian B is asking about Barclays are advising that due to changes in HMRC rules, he'll no longer be able to hold CTL in his ISA. Ian, can I suggest if you want to email directly to me at daniel@fox-davies.com, I will check with what the changes are of the rules and come back to you. That's probably one for this forum, but I'd be happy to address it to you offline. And the last question was about the warrants and the last financing. So, Steve, I'll address that if that's okay.
Sure.
So it was a half warrant or one warrant for every 2 shares, Ian. They were issued at a 50% premium, so they become in the money at 33p. I can't remember if I think they're 3 years from memory. I'd have to go up and check. So they were an inducement as part of the market. So they are live now, but they don't go in the money until we're above 33p. And they're just warrants that they were issued out to investors on the last round. Again, if you have any further questions, you're more than welcome to come back. So, Steve, then just in summary, scoping study, preliminary economic assessment, same thing. We have our scoping studies. We're now moving into the PFS. The more you look into it, the more detailed you get. It became then apparent that we needed sort of more hydrological studies. And there was a delay in the funding until November that we'd expected in September, which when we looked at, we were hoping Montgomery would be able to do them all in the drilling, but you're relying on third parties when you do a PFS. There's a lot of component parts that are coming back to the company. It's not the company it's obviously doing all of these third parties. So we're reliant on other people's work schedules. You go out for an initial quote, and then if you can't commission them and actually say, let's get going until November, other things come along. So that's one of the reasons why we've had to push back a few months on the PFS. But the key things I think to take away is it's a very robust PFS that we're undertaking. It should then be a relatively short timeline from the PFS to the DFS. Great news today in terms of commissioning on the pilot plant, which again, this is quite a substantial pilot plant. I mean, I think some people talk about pilot plants and you're talking about sort of backroom shared lab scales. This is a fairly significant pilot plant capable of providing a lot of data and a lot of product, which is going to be key to the company being able to engage with the most important audience here, which is going to be the end users. So this is really significant and shouldn't really be overlooked in terms of the key milestone for the company's development. And on that, Steve, then we're hoping that give or take 2 months, we should have our first end product and the reports back from the labs confirming exactly the grade of the lithium and the impurities. And then we can start engaging meaningfully with offtake partners and end industrial users.
I very much hope we can meet that. We shall try very, very hard.
Steve, well, as always, thank you very much. We'll hopefully get back to a schedule one in about 2 weeks' time. I think we're going to be talking a little bit about how project financing works. We're also hoping at some point in the next few weeks to get a further drilling update. I think that's the next off the ranks, but again, that'll come due when it's all ready. But to everybody else, thank you very much for joining. Thank you very much for the questions. This will be posted within a few hours to the company's site on Meet the Company. We'll post it into the Telegram group. If people will be happy to repost it, that's very much appreciated. And we look forward to seeing everybody in about 2 weeks' time. Steve, many thanks.
Okay, that's a pleasure.
Daniel, Steve, thank you very much indeed. Could I please ask investors not to close this session, as we'll now automatically redirect you for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order that the company can better understand your views and expectations. This may take a few moments to complete, but I'm sure it'll be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the team from CleanTech Lithium, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation. Good evening to you all.